Mhm. All right. So we're talking about how to talk to your child about your decision to homeschool when you haven't been doing it before, and they're not totally on board with you yet. Okay, so we talked about.
And you're Hal.
I'm Hal.
And I'm Melanie.
We still are.
And this is Making Biblical Family Life Practical.
Okay, so we talked about in the first half. We talked about preschoolers. We talked about the primary school kids. Let's move forward a little bit into the middle schoolers.
Whoa, middle schoolers are a challenge because middle schoolers are not always rational.
Well, we can talk about that for the next 3 or 4 days. I mean,
they are not always rational, and they also have typically a high level of anxiety.
mm-hmm.
They have social anxiety, and so they're going to be very afraid to do anything different than everyone else is doing.
Although some of them who have already been in middle school have probably experienced cliques and bullying, and so some of them are going to say, "Whew, I'm so glad that I'm not going to have to go back to that."
You know what, that's true, and we sometimes hear from parents who say, my middle schooler talked us into homeschooling because they want it out of that mess.
Well, I know that I encountered some bullying when I was in primary school, but that was the kind of bullying that you could sort of settle on the playground by pushing and shoving each other. But now with social media, and it gets a lot more refined and more subtle when you get up into the middle school years. And so, yeah, some middle schoolers are going to say, "This is my safe harbor. I am so glad.
I never want to go back."
So it may not be a hard sell for that crowd, but
some middle schoolers, though, are going to be terrified of doing anything different. Because being different in middle school means you get eaten alive.
Right.
And so they're very afraid of doing anything different than everybody else. And those are the kids you need to talk about and say, look, it's different for everybody right now.
Well, as we said in the first half, to recognize that the school environment and the way the classes are arranged and the amount of interaction that the students have with one another and with the teachers is going to be entirely different than they remembered. And so that's one thing that's going to be different. It's going to be different no matter what happens. But the second part is to recognize that there's a lot of homeschoolers and there's a lot of folks who are making the decision to homeschool for the first time now.
Yes.
And so, you're not going to be the one weirdo in the whole flock. There's going to be a lot of kids like you. And you know what? I think you'll enjoy this.
Yeah, I think explain to them in more detail than you would with an elementary school student,
right,
what you're doing and why, and help them to see that this is something many, many people are doing. You might even show them some news articles about how many people are homeschooling. Tell them about the local group you found. Talk to them about how you're going to make sure that they have friends.
Well, and see, that's an important thing. Just as a parenting rule, for those kids younger than the middle school age, what they really mainly need is they need your protection.
They need comfort.
They need comfort and they need direction. But when you get to the middle school years, you need to shift gears for their understanding. They still need guidelines and rules and they need boundaries, but you need to be teaching them to work these things through in their own heads. They need to understand why, not just what.
Yes.
And so, you still make the decision, hey, we're going to homeschool. That's the parent's decision, end of statement. But this is why.
Because you're, again, like a younger child, an 11-year-old cannot make wise decisions. If you think about the dumb things they do.
Well, your average 11-year-old is going to make stupider decisions than your average 8-year-old. That's just because of the biology of what's happening in their brains.
Because their brains are changing and their emotions are all up and down.
Right.
But if you think about the decisions they make on a daily basis, is this a child capable of deciding what kind of education they need in their life? No, it's not. And so you make that decision, but you're going to do a lot more explaining with the child this age because you want to walk them through it. You want them to see that you've thought it through. You want to answer all their questions. You want to tell them, yes, you're going to get you can get into college. Yes, you can get a job. Don't worry about all that.
Right.
But what they're mainly going to be concerned about is, will I be weird?
Right. And so recognize when you're explaining like this is for their understanding. You're not holding your decision up for a plebiscite. You're not giving it up for a vote and let them make the decision, but you're saying, This is why we've made that decision. This is the reasoning process we go through, because they're going to have to make decisions for themselves one day and then for their own family. They need to understand, how do you break down these problems and look at these questions from all these different angles and consider what's the best choice among the different options.
Because middle school is where you make the transition as a parent, where you begin transitioning
Right.
from the benevolent dictator a young child needs to the trusted advisor or coach an older child needs. You begin the transition. You don't totally go there, but you begin it. And so you're going to explain, coach, discuss, and make the decision yourself.
Now, high schoolers, it's the same thing, but more so.
Now, high schoolers are going to be worried about, will I be weird, like the middle schoolers, but they're
Yeah.
also worried about, is this okay? Is it legal? Will I have any friends? Or am I going to be all alone? How will I meet people? Can I get into college? Can I get a job? High schoolers are making that transition to adulthood, and that's a good thing. And it's good that they're asking those questions.
Right. And they may be asking questions like, are you qualified to teach this? And you may be saying inwardly, no, I'm not. No, but you know what? Okay.
Yeah, first of all, you are.
2 points on that. One of them is, probably everybody who's listening to this who's above the age of 18 has graduated from high school, right?
Yes.
Don't you think you can go back and tutor somebody to do the things you did in high school, especially now with a grown-up brain?
Especially now with being able to get courses on the internet and you get curricula that walk you through it, you can do this. Okay?
That's the second point I was going to make, is that there's so many resources out there to help you with this while still leaving you, the parents, in charge of the education and the training of your own children. You know what? You don't have to know how to speak fluent French in order for your child to take French in high school. If you can't speak it yourself, then there are resources to help teach it. Okay? So and you can tell that to your high schooler if they challenge you on that, to say, look, I can teach you an awful lot, and what I can't teach you, there are resources that will, so we can manage this.
And the answer is yes, they can get into college. We've sent 5 kids off to college. They all got offered academic scholarships to college.
Right.
And yes, they can get jobs. There are homeschoolers working everywhere. In fact, you probably are working with some homeschool graduates and you just don't know it.
That is true.
Why? Because they're not weird.
No. And I can say that in more normal times, which eventually we will have normal times again, okay? But in more normal times, there are usually in anything above the smallest hamlet, there's going to be support groups, there's going to be extracurricular activities, there will be opportunities to do things like music programs, like artistic programs, even sports.
Okay, in our area, we live in a small town, maybe about 45 minutes from a larger city.
Yeah.
And we have a football league, we have a volleyball league, we have art classes, we have band and chorus, we have a prom, there's history clubs, there's really anything that your child might be interested in is available.
And you know what?
But your high schooler won't know that because they've been in that isolated situation of the institutional high school. All they know is high school, so you're going to have to open their eyes to the world out there.
And frankly, in a lot of the high schools, an awful lot of those programs are put on pause right now anyway.
Yeah, it's not available there.
So
but your high schooler needs to know that you know what you're doing, that you've thought it through, that it's legal, that it's not going to harm them. In fact, it's probably going to help them. In fact, every college admissions office we visited with 5 kids, we visited a lot, has had an admissions counselor whose job is to recruit homeschoolers. Colleges love homeschoolers.
Almost every college that I've ever heard of has welcomed homeschoolers with open arms, because they find that homeschool graduates typically have worked with people of all ages. They're used to interacting with adults. They have an interest in their education, and they integrate very well into a campus community and into the academic world at higher education. And so, you know, it's not something that we need to be fearful or apologetic about. It's a very viable option, and it's one that's been recognized for many years in higher education and in other areas.
Well, wherever our kids have gone to college, they've met other homeschool graduates.
Yeah.
You know, from Oxford University in England, where one of our sons studied, to little Christian colleges, to big public universities, they've met lots of other homeschool graduates.
Right.
And usually they don't even know they're homeschool graduates for many months until they say something and say, "Whoa, you too?"
Yeah.
And so,
A couple of things to say here. There are some very structured programs that are out there to help homeschoolers, and some of those, you don't have to take something like that. There's every sort of teaching style and learning style represented, and you can find whatever mix works best for you as the teacher and your child as the student. Um, and so
and
don't feel like you have to get some sort of certification for yourself or for your curriculum.
no, you don't need an accredited curriculum ever, okay?
Hmm.
Nobody's ever asked us about that.
Right.
One thing I want to say, that's something that can be very motivational to your high schoolers to say, if you're at home with me, we have some freedom.
Hmm.
What language do you want to study? What sciences do you want to study?
Would you like to
What?
do some special projects? Do you want to study something that they don't offer in high school? Like we had one that was very interested in business, and so he had in his senior year he had a senior project starting a business.
And so you can do a wider range of things
Hmm.
with all your kids.
Right.
And you can get them involved to find out what their interests are, what they want to head toward, and get them all involved in that. Now, one thing I do want to say is if your child is absolutely adamant that they don't want to do it, that is more of a problem with a high schooler than it is with a younger child. With a younger child, you need to say, "So sorry, buddy, but God made me the parent."
Hmm.
With a high schooler, you really need to try to get them on your side because it's going to be much harder. High school is much more independent. They're going to have to do a lot of learning on their own, a lot of independent learning,
Hmm.
and you need to get them on your side. And that may mean that you need to go hunt down some research. You may need to get them some books to read, whatever you need to do. But you need to help them to understand why this is important.
And one of the things that we've encouraged young homeschoolers, new homeschoolers, is to make the decision go ahead and make the commitment for this year.
One full year.
We're going to take a full year because your child is going to take a little while to get his or her feet underneath her and to get used to this idea of mom's my teacher now. Really, yeah, really. It may take a little while for them to reestablish that, and so if you get frustrated and give it up after the first 9 weeks, that's only introduced delay and unsteadiness in your child's life. But if you say, look, we're going to carry this on out until next May, we're going to work this thing through, and at the end of the year, we can talk about
We'll
it.
revisit it. We'll talk about it. I'll ask you what you think. We'll talk about what we think, and we'll revisit it.
Because
Now-
the way it looks in April and May is going to be entirely different than the way it looks in October.
That is for sure.
Yeah.
In October, many of us feel like quitting, even if we've homeschooled for 25 years, like we have.
Yeah.
But by April or May, when you've got a year under your belt, I know very, very few parents who've made it a full year who quit
Mhm.
because by that point, everybody's seeing the advantages.
Yeah. So, anything else you would like to say for those accidental quarantine homeschoolers, those who are now making the decision?
Sometimes the transition to homeschooling is a little rough. It's hard to help your kids realize that you're in charge now. It's
Mhm.
hard for everybody to get used to the changes in your family life, but they're good changes, and they're changes that will build your relationships,
Mhm.
changes that one day you'll be very thankful have happened. And so don't let the initial pain
Mhm.
keep you from getting the eventual gain, because the gain is tremendous.
Mhm.
That-
And give your child the opportunity to see that education and growing in knowledge and wisdom and understanding is not a matter of hours spent sitting in desks surrounded by other people the same age as yourself, listening to a licensed professional drone on at the front of the room. That there's so much more to education than just classroom hours.
And learning can happen all the time and everywhere.
That's right. Okay. Well, look, we appreciate you joining us. We thank you for your interest and hope
Please
that you will.
subscribe
Yes.
and find us everywhere everywhere on social media: Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, at Raising Real Men.
Hmm.
Find our blog and store at raisingrealmen.com, our
Yep.
subscription box at craftsmancrate.com.
That's right. And if you're listening to this on the podcast, recognize we also have a YouTube channel. It's YouTube/Raising Real Men. Oh, you could have guessed that.
Yeah.
And Also, we have a listener response line. We're going to put the number in the show notes and at the bottom of the screen here. If you want to leave us a question, a suggestion, or an idea, or any sort of response or comment, we'd love to hear from you. Just call that number and leave a message, okay? Look, until next time, we do appreciate you spending the time with us. I'm Hal.
And I'm Melanie.
Thanks for joining us.
Bye, y'all.